guys, you're about to watch a Sunday morning teaching from Church Experience. If you would like to get connected, to learn more, or to help fuel the movement by giving online, you can click the appropriate links in the website.
You lift me up, fill my eyes with wonder. Forever young in your love, this freedom's untainted. With you, no moment is wasted. See the sun now bursting through the clouds, black and white, turn to color all around. All is new in the Savior I have found. This is living now. Living now. You take me higher than I've been before. It's your perfect love that sees me soar. God, your freedom is an open door. You are everything I want and more.
Why are you guys laughing? Well, welcome to the second week of Live the Dream, and we're talking about in this teaching series how to live the dream that God has for us, how to live the dream. And if you were not here last week, just let me catch you up real quick. We talked about laying the foundation and how before you can build up to a great life, you have to excavate, you have to dig down, and we talked about building on a solid relationship with God. We talked about living a great life and how God is honored when we live truly great lives. We gave a challenge to read the Bible every single day and let God's truth come and be the foundation of our lives. And many of you guys are doing that. It's so exciting. You're reading the Bible with us, and it's very cool. We'll talk more about that at the end and catch you up if you missed. But man, it's good. We're living the dream. Everybody say living the dream. Right on. Well, hey, I got a little gear on me today. I know you're laughing like, Brandon, what's up? Well, I got to tell you a story, all right, because this comes from someplace. I was living in Rapid City, South Dakota. And Rapid City, South Dakota, I mean, it's like after you leave Rapid City, it's probably 4 hours in any direction to get to the next nearest mall. So the Black Hills are beautiful, Mount Rushmore is there and all that, but after you leave town, there's not much but prairies in any direction. And so you have to go looking for adventure. You have to find some fun to do. Well, a good friend of mine named Paul Kind, we were working together serving at this church, and Paul is a guy that's into mountaineering. Okay, this is different than hiking. This is different than like going out on a little trail, walk. This is like climbing a mountain. All right, so obviously in mountaineering, the summit, the peak of mountaineering is Mount Everest. Like the tallest mountain in the world. Like many people have died trying to climb the thing. It's an intense deal. It's not just a casual endeavor. I mean, you train some people for a lifetime, but for months and years, and you get thousands of dollars of equipment. I mean, it's a big deal. But if you were going to climb Mount Everest, there's a few different mountains that you would want to climb if you're from the U.S. before you got there. You might go to Mount Rainier. You might go up to Denali in Alaska and climb some of these climbs before you get to Everest. Well, one of the climbs that you might consider taking in preparation for this is a mountain called Cloud Peak in Wyoming. And my friend Paul said, "Hey, Brandon, I'm going to go climb Cloud Peak. Would you like to climb with me?" I'm like, "Yeah, dude, I'll walk up a hill with you." He's like, "No." He's like mountaineer, like this is like we climb the mountain that's going to take like a couple days and like we might die. I'm like, "Oh, let me pray about that." But once he got me excited about it, I started reading about it, and he's like, "Well, you got to get some gear." So I got myself a backpack, I got myself a headlamp, and a specialized sleeping bag because we're going to be sleeping in the snow, all kinds of crazy stuff. And we decided we're going to climb this 13,000-foot mountain called Cloud Peak. And we set out one day, and we had all of our gear, and we started walking down the trail. It was just like any other day, but it turned into an incredible adventure about a couple hours into it because we're all of a sudden so far away from civilization that, like, I literally, if he would have left me, like, I would have died because I couldn't see any, like, markers in any direction that would lead me to a parking lot or to a road. I mean, we were in the wilderness. And we're climbing up this mountain, and we stop at one point. I don't know if you can go back to this picture if you haven't hit it already. There's a tent, and we stayed overnight next to this beautiful lake. It was so cool, but I mean, especially for us Florida people, I mean, it was freezing cold. Like, I thought I was going to die at points. Like, I am in this specialized sleeping bag, but this picture doesn't really tell you how cold it was. It was bitter cold. and we hiked through the night with these headlamps so we could see the path in front of us. Well, we get to a spot that's probably a few hours from the summit. And so we've hiked all night long. We've hiked for many hours. It's like a 2-day track. And we're almost up to the summit. And Paul says, all right, hey, we're going to stop here, and we're going to take off our packs. Because what we're going to do is we're going to leave behind everything we don't need for the top, anything we don't need for the summit. And that will give us less weight, so when we make the real difficult summit, we don't have all that extra weight. So we stop and we take some extra stuff out of our bags. Well, Paul's a minimalist, as any true mountaineer is. So he had nothing that he didn't really need on this trip. Like literally, my friend Paul, he would take the tags off his clothes because he said, it's unneeded weight. He's like, I don't want to carry this for 2 days to the top of the mountain. I don't need it. I mean, that's a true, this is like Father's Day, Man Day. Like, isn't that a guy thing to do? It's like, there's no way, but it's like, it's unnecessary. Simplify, get down to so he would literally take the tags off of his clothes because it's unneeded weight. Well, I'm new at this, and so I had a few extra things in my bag that you probably didn't need. And so, for example, we wanted to have our journals, at the top. So, you get to the top and you write something down. That way, if you die on the way back, at least, it was all worth something. Someone could read what you did. So we got to the top and we're sitting up there. And after we had unloaded all this extra stuff and we're sitting around, we pull our journals out. And I pull my book out, my journal that I would normally write in. And so I'm writing, and he just looks at me, he's got a grin. He pulls out a piece of paper, he's like, minimalist. And he gets a glance at my bag, and he's like, hey, what's in your bag there? And I was like, it's my sleeping bag. He's like, yeah. He's like, that's like the heaviest thing in your bag, right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, remember when we left all that stuff that we didn't need? I was like, oh, yeah, I probably should have left the sleeping bag too. Probably don't need that on top of the mountain, But yeah, it was such a great trip though, because we get up there and you can see views. I don't know if you can maybe click through a few of these. You've probably seen it, but it's just, you can see so far. It's beautiful. Now let's pause on this, Josh. They'd have these mile markers along the trail. And other hikers before you had stacked up these stones so that you knew which direction was the right direction. That way, if you got off course a little bit and you saw some stacked stones, you knew you were at least on this common route to the top of the summit. Well, at night, it doesn't do you a ton of good, and when you're falling in cracks and crevices and snow, you just do your best. But man, what I loved about that is it was the camaraderie. See, if I would have done that alone, I really would have, joking about it, but I really probably would have died if I would have tried that by myself, because I was a novice. I was a rookie. I had no experience. I would have got lost. Those little stone piles, I don't know how he spotted them, but I would have not even seen those. I would have been out in the wilderness, and I would have been a goner, eaten by a mountain lion. But he knew what he was doing. And man, the conversations, some of them I can't even tell you about, on the way up, guy time, the fun time, the experiences, bonding together, doing something, conquering a mountain together. And I thought about, living the dream, living the dream. What's it mean to really live the dream? I'm thinking through this message series and thinking through what to me has been some of the most fulfilling parts of my life. What's been some of the most foundational parts of my life? And not only just my life, I take the Bible and I take a look and I see God, what do you have to say about living the dream for us? And I found these verses in Hebrews chapter 10 I want to read to you. I think they're so good. Verse 24 and 25. It says, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as we see the day approaching, as we see the end approaching. It's such a good and challenging verse for me, because I look and it says, let us spur each other on. Let's spur each other on. And I think one of the things that makes life good and what makes life doable is when we have other people around us that we're on the adventure with together. And we have that person that we're locking arms with, and we might be trying to summit something in our life, but we're not going alone. And it might be the summit of just trying to raise kids or to in your career or to have good friendships. I don't know what the summit is for you, but man, it's the journey that makes it beautiful. It's not just the destination. And some of us get destination disease. You know what that is, right? Destination disease means you get so fixated on the destination that you miss the joy of the journey. Because it's all about when I get there, and we do this in little cycles. It's when I get the promotion, or when my kid gets to this certain point, or when I have kids, or when I meet that special someone, or when I get out of school, or when I get to retirement, when I get to this point financially, when I get out of debt, and it's all these destinations. Sometimes we miss out on the joy of the journey. And I guess what I'm saying today is that if we could all become better at developing great relationships, I think we'd be able to more often look around and look at the Lord and just say, God, I'm grateful because I'm living the dream. And there's always hardships, there's always challenges, but God, thank you, living the dream. Because it's really about that. It's about loving God. We talked about that last week. And it's about loving others. You know, Jesus, when he was asked, he was pressed upon by some religious people to say, hey, man, there's a lot of commandments and stuff. Like what's the most important one? And they're trying to, trick question, right? But he shot back with a real simple, crisp, and clear answer. He's like, well, the greatest commandment of all is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then second to that is love your neighbor as yourself. It's about love. It's about relationship. What's love? It's relationship. It's companionship. It's friendship. And God himself is love. And that's what defines who he is in his essence. So it shouldn't surprise us that the glue that holds life together and that makes life sweet, what really makes it possible to live the dream, is relationships. That's when it comes down to it. We're not always great at that, are we? We're not always great at that. And so here's what I would love to do in our time together today. I would like to teach on how we can develop great relationships. And perhaps you're a note taker and you like to take some notes. We got clipboards and pens there by your feet, and you got a weekly that you got on the way in. So maybe you'd like to write some things down. Let me just jump right into it. How do we do this? How do we develop great relationships? Well, great relationships, one, they develop when we listen closely. Great relationships develop when we listen closely. It's not easy to do. In fact, we are more naturally inclined to talk. You know, we're more naturally inclined just to share our own opinions and to get out whatever we want to say when we're in a relationship. Proverbs 18 verse 2 says, fools find no pleasure in understanding, but fools delight in airing their own opinions. And this is the way we come into the world. You get put in a room with someone or in a vehicle with someone or in a home with someone, and you naturally tend to just air your own opinion. You just kind of share whatever you want to share. It's all about you. You never think to listen to the other person. And when we're not good listeners, this is what breaks down relationships. Let me give you, because I talk about that, but let me give you an example. Bad listening. Check it out.
Have you ever spent like 5 minutes with him? He's totally self-centered and insensitive. They just don't go together. I mean, she's my best friend. She has these emotional needs he can't meet. Remember what she went through with Brad? It's just like awful. And now he's the one acting needy?
He's at the 50. He's at the 40. He's going to go all the way. Johnson breaking loose. The rookie's on fire. This kid's having a huge first half. It's just incredible.
You're such a great listener.
How many women are angry right now? I'm just kidding. Man, that's so fun. It's so typical. And I mean, like, we get so focused on whatever it is, and we're not great listeners naturally. And we've all been guilty of this. Doesn't matter if you're a man or woman. Guys, I'm talking a little bit more to us today because it's Father's Day. It's Man Day, as we're calling it here. But man, we all get caught up in this and not listening well. But when we don't listen well, it really erodes what otherwise could be a great relationship. I like Dale Carnegie. He says, you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. And the way of our world is just, that's what we do. We want people to notice me. I want people to be interested in me. I want people to care about me. And part of that's not unhealthy. It's good to want to experience love, and that's what God created us for. And there's a craving for that, to be in relationship and to be cared for and to have others be concerned about you and that you matter. And you do, obviously, in God's eye and in others. But when you live your life that way, trying to get that from others, you push people away. But what's interesting is when you go into life with the approach of, I want to help other people feel valued. I want other people to feel respected and cared for and loved. And it's amazing how those that approach to life develops so many great relationships when you really genuinely care and love for others. A great story about two great prime ministers from Great Britain's history, one named William Gladstone, the other one Benjamin Disraeli. And there was a story about one woman who went out to dinner with both of these men on consecutive nights. And it was interesting that she got to spend time with both of these great leaders in Great Britain's history, and she was asked upon having this dinner with both these men what her experience was like. What was it like with Mr. Gladstone and Mr. Disraeli? And she said, well, after spending an evening with Mr. Gladstone, I came away and I felt like he was the most fascinating, most interesting person in all of England. She said, after my time with Mr. Disraeli, I came away and I felt like I was the most interesting and fascinating person in all of England. You see the difference there? Both were great experiences. Both were great people, great leaders, great evenings. But on the one hand, she came away and, well, he's all that. The other one, she came away and said, man, he made me feel like I'm all that. It's a difference, and it's a slight difference, but it changes and it transforms our relationships. If we could live with that kind of perspective, that when we're around others, that we're there to love and to express God's love to them and to pour God's love into their life, man, not only would it impact them, but it will have a direct impact on your relationships, your friendship, your romantic relationship. It really changes everything. And we don't all get this right every time. We've all stumbled and fallen, and God knows that, and that's why he speaks to this so much in the Bible. One of my favorite verses, James 1, verse 19. It says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. I like how the Bible's even telling us to take notes. God's like, hey, you need to write this down, okay, because you're going to forget this. Take note. Everyone should be quick to listen. Everybody say quick to listen. Everybody say slow to speak. Everybody say slow to become angry. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. And it's interesting that our natural inclination is the opposite of all those things. When we're in relationship, when we're in companionship, we're doing life with others, it doesn't matter if it's in the workplace or in the home or wherever, we naturally tend to speak quickly and to not listen. And you know what? We're more concerned about what we have to say than what another has to say. And we very quickly can get angry with each other and upset and impatient and frustrated. Those natural impulses rise all the time. The next point, if you'd like to write it down, not only do we need to listen, but we need to speak carefully. Speak carefully. So listen closely, speak carefully, because not only is it important that we listen if we want to develop great relationships, but guys especially, we need to speak carefully. All of us, we need to work on this. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13. And I'm going to read a couple different passages from chapter 18 here. First of all, verse 13, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. One of the ways we get ourselves into trouble with our words is when we speak before we listen. And how many of us have missed out on great opportunities to express the love of Christ to someone, or to really help someone or encourage someone because we've jumped in too soon, we haven't listened, we haven't heard what they're really saying, or maybe a lot of arguments have swelled into battles because, there's this conflict, two people seeing something from a different perspective, and in that moment, I've had this conversation so many times with couples, maybe before they get married, or maybe after they get married and they're in the midst of that trying to figure it out, and it's like, you're seeing with the blinders of, my perspective. And if you can set those off for a moment and, okay, so what are they really trying to say to me? What's the problem? How can I help them feel cared for? Speak carefully. And then if you jump down to verse 6, it goes on and it says, the lips of fools bring them strife, but their mouths invite a beating. The mouths of fools are their undoing, and their lips are a snare to their very lives. So it tells us here that there's potency in our language, in our words, in our conversation. Our lips can be dangerous. And anger and arguing ruin great relationships. And I would imagine that there's got to be some here today that are in the midst of that. And there's probably some who are here. Maybe there's a few that are here with someone, and in the last 48 hours, the last week or two, there's been some significant conflict. How do you get out of that? How do you overcome that? Because you start digging the hole, and it just gets worse, and you get on this. I heard Dr. Emerson Eggerichs, I'm not saying his last name right. He's a marriage author and counselor. He wrote the book Love and Respect. He says we got this crazy cycle. Instead of loving each other, which leads to respect, which leads to more love, we do the opposite, and we start disrespecting and being unloving, and you get stuck in that cycle. How do you get out of that? I wrote 4 things down, and the 4th one's probably the most potent if you just did that alone, but there's a few others. You have to forgive. Maybe some of you in the room, and maybe it's not the person you're here with, it's someone else. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a friend, a sibling, a child, maybe it's someone else, and there's an estranged relationship. God desires for relationships to be in wholeness and all that, and so where do I start? Forgive. You have to forgive. You have to extend forgiveness. And a lot of us demand forgiveness first before we're willing to give it, but you have to lead with forgiveness and lay down your rights first. 2, overlook offenses. The Bible says it's to the glory of a man to overlook offenses, and we get offended over so many small things. Sometimes that can lead to conflict. Number 3, communicate lovingly. Use your language, your words to express what you want to say in a loving way instead of a demanding or a demeaning way, which obviously ruins relationships. But number 4, if you just did this, you're like, man, I don't know where to go, Brandon. I'm stuck. I got this from a mentor of mine, Pastor Kevin Myers of 12 Stone Church. And he said this is what totally transformed his marriage. He had, in the early years of his life, he had a really big struggle in his marriage. And he said this is what saved our marriage. He said we learned to serve each other. We learned to put each other first, and we learned to try to outserve each other. And when you do something to serve others, you're humbling yourself, and you're elevating them, you're respecting them, you're loving them. And so if you find yourself in that hole relationally at work, in your home, in your friendships, in any way, consider serving the other person, finding a way to show and express love to them. You know, I love that we have dozens of people every Sunday now, and throughout the week even, that are serving in different capacities. And yeah, there's things that need to be done. We had people showing up here at 6:45, 7 a.m. that we're setting up, and we have 400 feet of pipe and drape of temporary walls that we set up around this place every Sunday, so that it doesn't feel like a school, that it feels like a place where people can come and worship and there's not distractions and all that. Set up sound systems and, you know, kids' classes and all that. And those things need to be done, and there's people that stick around and stay here till about 2 o'clock, a whole other crew that comes in after the 11:30 service, and they do the same thing, and those roles need to be done. But one of the greatest reasons why we love to recruit people is not because all the bases aren't covered, because most of them are kind of covered. We're getting it done. It's always helpful, and it's wind in the sails when a couple more people join in, so that's great. But we love recruiting and helping people get connected because we know when they get in relationship and when they start serving, that's when their life starts to change. And we've seen that over and over again. And so many of you would say, yeah, that was me. I got connected. I got to know some other people, and that gave me a responsibility, so I would be here, and God started impacting my life. And as I serve and I'm giving myself away, God poured in much more than I could ever give. And so I love that, and that's so cool. And, so it makes an impact. Verse 20 of chapter 18, to go back to this idea of our mouths and the impact of them and speaking carefully, it says, from the fruit of our mouth, a person's stomach is filled. With the harvest of their lips, they are satisfied. Verse 21, the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. The tongue is powerful. Dads, it's Father's Day. Moms, I say this to you as well, but dads, those of you who have kids, you got to speak carefully to your kids. Our words can be destructive. In those young years, they're listening and they're looking up to and learning from, and they catch so much more from how we live and what we do than what we even instruct them on. But both are important, but man, they pick up things. And if you're using your words to be demeaning to someone else in the home or to them, and you're saying things like, you're so stupid, why can't you do this? That's going to sear and imprint on their mind a self-image that may take them years, decades, if ever, to overcome. So speak carefully to them, build them up, encourage them, make it your goal, make it your practice, your work to build life into them and strengthen them and raise them up in the Lord and teach them the ways of the Lord. The Proverbs, especially in the Bible, talks so much about, in Deuteronomy, it talks about, instructing your kids and investing in your family and pouring in. And your family for you might be different. Maybe you're pre-kids, or maybe you don't have kids or don't desire to have kids, and that's your thing. You watch us and our 4 kids, you're like, I don't ever want to have kids. That's birth control right there, man. But whatever your family looks like in your relationships, man, if you could view our lives as like a conduit, a vessel. God's love, which we experience, and we tap into that, and it flows through us into the lives of others. Man, it's just so fulfilling to live that way, and it makes such a difference. But on the flip side of that, if we're not careful, it can be destructive. And I think being careful of the words that come into our kids' lives, not just from our own lips. We live in a media generation, and that's not going to change. I don't think the answer is to become recluses and, silence, all the voices of the world and just kind of hide in a bubble and away from it, because you can't really escape it in the world we live in. My wife's mom is a elementary school teacher, and I walked into her classroom at Christmas break last year in their school. Like every kid, maybe your kids' class is like this, every kid had an iPad, and we're walking in there and they're showing us all the things they can do, and I'm like, that's crazy. That's so different than even when I was in elementary school. But now everyone, that's just how they, and you can't escape that. But what you can do is to teach your kids and put boundaries on them and be careful and be involved and invested and a part of things. Dad, so think of Father's Day here, you're a part of things and not distant. And you have your workload and your busyness and all that too, and you can't always be there, but you can be invested and involved. What's going on? What are you learning? What are you watching? Let me hang out with you and be a part of this, and being careful that what's coming in, the words that are flowing into their life, the images that they're seeing, the communication that's flowing in is positive. It's God-honoring. It's not something that's going to be destructive for them. One more before we move on. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 28. Proverbs 25:28. It says, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. So someone who lacks self-control, it says it's like a city whose walls are broken. And you think of the era that this was written in, where the walls literally protected the city, and they kept people safe, much like a modern-day military or modern-day satellites and technology that would keep us safe from pending enemies. Well, walls around a city are what kept it safe. And it says, someone who lacks self-control, it's like the walls are broken down, and you're leaving yourself vulnerable. And how many guys, because the walls of self-control were broken down in their life, in a moment of anger, in a moment of impatience, have said things or done things that have destroyed relationships, that have lost a job, that have pushed away a close companionship, have landed them in jail, caused irreversible consequences? Because in a moment, a lack of self-control, the words that came out that were not spoken carefully, they were spoken in haste and they brought ruin. And so I'm just saying, let's be careful, guys. Let's be careful. Let's be careful of the words that are coming out. Let's listen. Let's speak. Right on? All right, come on. Let's talk about love in the right language. That's the next thing. If you're writing it down, love in the right language. So how do you live the dream relationally? How do you have great relationships? This is a part of life, and it's not all of life, but it's a part of life. How do you have great relationships? Well, you got to love in the right language. And there was a book that came out. My wife pointed to me to this a while back, and it was called The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. It's been around for a while now. But you can see a lot has been written about it online if you want to look up and read more. But you got the 5 languages here on the screen, I believe. But the five different expressions of how we give and receive love, according to Gary Chapman. He says, he's a Christian author. He says, 1 is receiving gifts. 2 is quality time together. 3, words of affirmation. 4, acts of service, and 5, physical touch. And what's interesting is he says we tend to give love in the way that we most like to receive it. And he said we all have 1 or 2 primary ways that we like to give love, or we like to receive love, and that's how we tend to give it. So I want you just to think about it, and what's your primary way that you like to receive love? You really feel loved and valued with gifts or time, words of affirmation, acts of service, physical touch. I mean, what is it that makes you feel fulfilled? There's probably 1 or 2 in there that really resonate with you more than the others. We tend to give it to others in the way that we most like to receive it. So the person that you are closest to, the people closest to you in your life, you will probably speak your own language to them, but the problem is they're not speaking your language. So if you're all about quality time and they're all about, let's say, acts of service, and you're like, hey, you just want to hang out, and there's stuff to be done, it's like you're not speaking the same language, If you could serve them in some way, man, that might change things. And so I just want you to think, those around you, what's their love language? The people that you're closest to, how can you give and express the love of God to them through speaking in that language? I'm going to move on to this final one, and I'm keeping it simple and brief today, guys. We like to get to the point, so here it is. Extend the extra effort. Extend the extra effort. And I want to go to the New Testament, and I want to look at, we're hanging out in Proverbs because that's where we're reading right now, and I think there's some good stuff there. But I want to jump to Proverbs for a moment. In Matthew, in chapter 5, Jesus is teaching, and I just want to pick up part of his teaching. His whole chapter is great if you just want to dig into it. But Matthew 5, verse 41, he says this, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Let me read verse 41 again. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. He's teaching a principle here, the principle of what I have in your notes here, the extra effort, putting in the extra effort. If you want to have great relationships, you put in the extra effort. You go the extra mile. So what does that look like? So I have a neighbor. He just moved here within the last year from South Africa. He lived in Durban, South Africa. And it's a developed country like the U.S., but at the same time very different. And he said one of the things that's interesting about South Africa, and I was asking him the differences of our country versus his country and just kind of learning from him. And he said, well, in our country, we have random power outages. He said, the government was warned years ago that the need was outpacing the infrastructure, and so they needed to add infrastructure to the South Africa power grid, but it was never done. The leaders at the time, they didn't do it for whatever reason, and so now there's not enough power to supply for the needs of all the people in the growing population. For one, it makes me appreciate all that we have here, the things we take for granted. When you turn the light switch on, there's power. But he says, interesting, he said that they'll schedule this, and they'll let you know usually when this is going to happen, but they'll have to shut the power grid down in certain areas to conserve power, and it might be for 4-hour blocks or 6-hour blocks or 8-hour blocks. So it's kind of a big deal if you're eating in a restaurant and the power just goes out. This was his quote to me, his words, not mine. He said, in South Africa, we were already bad drivers, but he goes, it doesn't help when all the stoplights go out. He's like, this is bad. I'm like, so what happens if someone just runs through the light and they don't stop? He goes, I've lived there 20 years in Durban. He goes, I've never seen a police officer pull someone over for running a red light. This is kind of more common, I guess, and where he lived. But it's interesting, the power just kind of interrupts you in the middle of what you're doing, and it's all of a sudden it's, like what you were doing is now, you were watching a movie, okay, we'll pick that up tomorrow. And it's total interruption. It takes precedent over whatever you're doing, because you can't do anything about it, in this case more important. Jesus, it seems to me, was a master at navigating interruptions. I think of his life. I think about when he spent time with the disciples. It's pretty often that they're traveling around disciples, his closest followers, and he's investing in them. And they would come into a certain context, and he would have an opportunity to teach, and he would say, hey, check out this tree. He'd teach them a life lesson on that. Or there would be something happen, or some ministry, or some miracle, or something, and he'd say, hey, did you notice what happened here? And he'd explain it to me, he'd unpack it. There was a time where he stops at a well, and he's ministering to this woman, and it ends up impacting an entire city. Well, it's just a meeting of this woman at the well. We got the story of the woman at the well, and it changed everything for her in this city. But it began with just a simple conversation out of a relationship that happened unintentionally, at least on her part. I was even thinking about this a little deeper, and I thought, man, even to the point of his death on the cross. Do you guys remember what happened when Jesus was on the cross? He's dying there, excruciatingly painful death. He's been tortured. He's been beaten. He's there hanging on the cross. He's dying for your sins and mine. He's got the weight of the world literally on his shoulders. He's hanging on the cross. He's dying. And on each side of him, there's these two other crosses. There's these two thieves that are being hung with him. And they're guilty of their sins. Jesus is the only person who's never sinned. He's the only innocent one in the crowd. But they're guilty. They deserve what they got. But they watch him and how he responds. Maybe they've heard of him and heard his teaching. And they were actually part of the process of mocking him. But at one point, one of the thieves, noticing that this guy's different, and watching someone die and die gracefully, right? And some of you have had to go through that, and it's horrible. But you watch the life of this man who is without sin, who is God's son, and they watch him die. And the thief says to him, he asks him, inquires with him about heaven and about eternity. You could tell this spiritually, something's changing in him in this interaction. And Jesus has time in the midst of dying to stop, and he ministers to this man, and he talks to him, and he says in the end of the conversation, today you will be with me in paradise. We're both dying. I'm not going to change that. But when you die, it's not the end. There's something even greater, and we can continue this relationship. This is a long-term relationship. And he had time in the midst of his most difficult moment, the heaviest pressure he'd ever carried. He had time to stop and minister to someone and express love to them, even to his dying breath. And he's in relationship. That says to me that relationship trumps whatever else I have going on in my life. When I have pressure, my natural inclination, I don't know about you, is to push back and withdraw. I don't have time. I don't have time for this conversation. I don't have time for this phone call. I don't have time for this meeting. I don't have time to be a part of this gathering or this service or this thing. And you know what I mean? And you're like, well, I'm busy, so I push people away. And Jesus didn't do that. When he was busy, when he was hurting, when his life was full, he drew people in. It makes such a difference, doesn't it? If we could go that extra effort. I do not always get this right. So I'm going to share a quick story here in conclusion that will hopefully make an imprint. But I want you to know that I get this wrong so often. But there was a time this last week I got it right. With God's help, I was working diligently on some projects I had, and I was very into them, and they were important, and I knew it needed to get done, and I wasn't working hard, and I was a little tired, and I needed to get done, and one of my sons came in, and the other son was outside playing with the neighbor kid, and they were really involved in what they were doing, so he was kind of the odd man out, and so he kind of came in, and I could tell he was down, and he's kind of, hey, Dad, what you doing? Kind of leaning on my shoulder. Hey, buddy, what's up? And I'm still working away, and hey, how's it going? So we're kind of talking a little bit, and he's like, hey, you want to play spy with me? I knew he was saying he was going to go spy on the other guys, and he's got some spy gear that he got for his birthday, and I didn't really have time for that, honestly. We had something else to go to, and it wasn't too long, and like I said, I've got it wrong many times, but in this time I just felt like God saying, hey, this is important. And so I said, hey, yeah, let's go play spy. Like, give me 1 minute, finish up what I was doing. I was like, all right, what are we going to do? And so he's got all this gear, and he's like, here, you hold this, we'll do this, we'll sneak around the house. And so we're going sneaking around the house, and we're spying on the other brother and his friend, and this is kind of this cool moment. Let's get the dart gun, and like we're really into it. And eventually one of the boys spots us, and so they start chasing us, and we run around behind the house, and we're in this, it's only like a 5-minute interaction, but it's just like this great battle emerges with Nerf dart guns, and then another neighborhood kid ends up, I don't know if he's got freed up or whatever, but he came out and joined in. So there's this group of 5 of us. All of a sudden, there's this camaraderie is happening, relationships happening, everyone's involved, included. And I kind of slipped away and went back to finish what I was doing. Probably 15 minutes later, I look up out the window. He's out there still fully engaged. Everybody's hanging out, having good together. And he just needed that moment. What would have happened if I would have said, you know what, can you come back in a half hour? Would have missed the moment. This is so important, and I have a deadline, and I'm leaving. I don't have time. Tomorrow. Man, let me give you an idea. How about you go do this, and I'll do this, and I'll watch you. I'll come out and check on you in 15. And so there's a time for that. There's a place for that. You have the responsibilities. You get the point. It was a moment that was meant to be. We're made for that moment. And then God set that up and gave an opportunity for relationships to be formed and to be connected. I've missed that moment so many times, and I regret it. I always do when I miss the moment. I wish I could go back and reduce so many moments, as I know you do as well. But God's more concerned about your future than your failures. And you can't dwell on all those things that you wish you could change. You can only focus on the future. And I want to encourage you with everything in me to develop great relationships, because relationships are what matter. But you have to listen. You have to really look in the eyes of someone around you, and you have to listen. And you have to ask questions. Ask questions. They'll help you develop great relationships. You got to speak carefully, because your words can destroy those relationships. You have to speak in the right language and learn how to really give and receive love. It's not an easy thing to do. It sounds simple, but it's not easy. And you got to go that extra mile. You got to go the extra effort. And if you do that, I think you'll find yourself years from now looking back and you say, man, I'm living the dream. Everything's not perfect, but I got some great relationships around me. I got some friendships. There's some people I love, and they love me, and I'm grateful for that. And I want that for all of us. What I love about the church is that it connects people. It brings us together. It brings us from our independent islands of life, and it brings us together. And it's a beautiful thing. And so I'm grateful we get to do this together. We're a part of it. We got life groups coming again in the fall. There's serving opportunities. There's so many good things that can help you get connected. But at the end of the day, it comes down to a relationship. And I hope that you will engage and develop great relationships. So let me ask you one more time. Right on? Hey, let's pray together. Father, I thank you so much that you, in relationship, have engaged us in conversation. You have expressed your love to us, and God, we only can love really out of response to your love. Greater love has no man than this, you say in the Bible, than to lay down their life for their friends. And Jesus, you laid down your life for us. You gave everything so that we could experience your love and your presence that we just sang about a moment ago. And so we're so grateful for that. And God, you've also not only given us a relationship with you, which we talked about last week, but as we think about our relationships with others this week, you've given us such a gift to be surrounded by people. And sometimes people can bring the greatest pain into our lives. But when we know that when it's working right, people can bring the greatest fulfillment and joy, second only to you, into our lives. And so I pray that for each person here, that God, where there is broken relationships, that there would be healing. Where there's relationships that are not going so smooth, that there would be serving and loving and forgiving, and that would be able to move on and past and beyond and through the difficulties. I pray that you'd strengthen, there's marriages in the room, I pray you'd strengthen those marriages or dating relationships. I pray that relationships between fathers today and mothers and their children and parents and siblings, that those would be strengthened. I pray that friendships would be formed and forged as we serve together, as we love together and engage in relationships. I pray that as the enemy tempts us to withdraw and push back and isolate ourselves and do our own thing, that God, we'd fight against that and we would engage in others, knowing that we're all created for relationship. Father, help us to listen and speak carefully and to love others well and to go that extra mile. We thank you that you've done these things for us. May we do the same for others. It's in Jesus' name we pray, and everyone said together, amen.
Thanks for watching Church Experience Online. Don't forget to learn more, to get connected, or to learn how to fuel the movement by giving online. Check out the website for the appropriate links. We hope to see you in person really soon.